Under the blinding lights of America's Got Talent, an 11-year-old blind girl sits trembling at the piano. A wrong key throws her into silence. The audience starts to whisper. Then, from the front row, Keanu Reeves rises, walks toward the stage, and says softly, "I don't need to see the music, I just need to feel it." Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The lights inside the studio of America's Got Talent were brighter than day itself. Beams of white and gold poured down from above, bouncing across mirrored panels and catching on every metallic surface. The crowd pulsed with energy, thousands of clapping hands creating a sound that vibrated through the floor. Camera lenses tilted toward the stage, where an 11-year-old girl stood in the shadow of a grand piano. Her name was Lila Turner. She gripped her cane tightly, the smooth handle damp beneath her palm. She couldn't see the stage lights, the cameras, or the rows of expectant faces, but she could feel the pressure in the air, thick as fog. Her mother, Rachel, waited just behind the curtains, whispering words that Lila carried like armor. "Remember, sweetheart," her mother had said, "you don't need sight to see beauty. Just listen to your heart." Lila's heart now thumped in uneven rhythm as she took small, careful steps toward the piano bench. Her shoes brushed against the smooth floor. The microphone hanging above her head caught the faint tapping of her cane before an assistant gently took it and guided her to the seat. "You're all set, honey," a voice whispered. Lila nodded, her hair falling across her small, pale face. The audience quieted. The judges smiled politely, one leaning forward with curiosity, another crossing his arms as if expecting a novelty act. They had seen hundreds of Seven of Con performers that day, some breathtaking, others forgettable. Lila didn't know any of that. All she knew was the sound of her own breath and the smooth ivory keys waiting before her. She reached out and touched the edge of the piano to find her position. Her fingers trembled slightly. Then she took a long breath and whispered the title of her piece under her breath, "River Flows in You." The sound of her voice was barely audible, but the microphone picked it up, carrying it into every corner of the hall. Somewhere near the front, a man in a black jacket sat quietly, his eyes calm and observant. Keanu Reeves. He had been invited as a guest by one of the producers, part of a charity feature for children with disabilities. He didn't expect to be moved. He just came to listen. But as he watched the blind girl adjust her seat, something in her composure reminded him of fragile strength, the kind you only see in those who've learned to live without self-pity. When the soft murmur of the audience faded, Lila lifted her hands. For a second, there was nothing but stillness, the kind that stretches forever just before the first note. Then her fingers pressed down. The first sound was wrong. A discordant tone echoed across the studio. Lila froze. A small gasp slipped from her lips as she tried again, but the spacing felt off. One of the piano's legs had been adjusted slightly during setup, causing the keys to shift just enough to disorient her tactile sense. What felt familiar now felt foreign. The audience exchanged confused glances. One whisper turned into several. Somewhere in the crowd, someone chuckled softly, thinking it was part of an act. Lila swallowed hard, panic rising. Her ears caught fragments of noise. What happened? Is she okay? But no one moved to help. Her mother stood backstage, hands clasped together, tears threatening to fall. And then, amid the murmurs, Keanu Reeves leaned forward. He could sense it, how fear was strangling the child's courage, how the moment was slipping into cruelty. His eyes fixed on her trembling hands, on the confusion written across her small face. He didn't think, he simply stood. The motion caught the corner of the camera's frame. Viewers at home would later replay that moment again and again, the instant a quiet man decided to act while everyone else hesitated. Lila's head tilted slightly. She could hear the movement, the firm steps approaching. The murmurs quieted, unsure what was happening. Then the studio fell into near silence as Keanu Reeves, in his dark jacket and gentle expression, walked toward the piano. Every eye in the auditorium turned toward him. The judges exchanged startled glances, whispering among themselves. Security hesitated by the edge of the stage, unsure whether to intervene. But there was something steady in Keanu's stride, something that said he didn't need permission. The crowd seemed to hold its breath as he stepped into the spotlight beside Pride, the young girl. Lila froze when she heard the footsteps stop just behind her. "Who's there?" she asked softly, her voice trembling through the microphone. Keanu crouched beside the piano bench, keeping his tone low and calm. "It's okay, Lila," he said gently. "I just want to make sure the piano's ready for you." His voice carried the kind of warmth that disarmed fear, the kind that made even the harsh lights feel distant. He reached forward and lightly pressed a few keys, adjusting the bench's position and gently straightening the pedal frame that had shifted. Then he rested a hand on the edge of the piano so she could orient herself again. "Sometimes the world moves things around on us," he said quietly. "But that doesn't mean the music is gone. You just have to find it again." The camera zoomed in, capturing the moment, his face calm and sincere. Hers, confused, but listening. The audience that once murmured now sat in complete silence. Even the production crew, hidden behind the glowing monitors, stopped talking. Keanu gave her a faint smile. "You don't have to see the keys," he whispered. "Just feel them." Lila took a shaky breath. Her hands hovered above the piano. She could feel the vibration of the strings from where his fingers had tested the notes. Slowly, she nodded. Keanu stood back, returning to the front of the stage, but his presence lingered like a quiet shield around her. Rachel wiped her tears backstage, her chest rising with both fear and awe. She had seen celebrities before, but never one who stepped into the light to protect a child from humiliation. Lila's small fingers pressed a new chord. It was soft at first, tentative, then clearer, stronger. A stillness filled the room. Somewhere deep inside, Keanu knew something had changed. The next sound that filled the studio wasn't laughter or confusion. It was a single, clear note. Lila found her place. She pressed another key, then another, searching for rhythm like a child reaching for her mother's hand in the dark. Each note grew steadier, her confidence returning one heartbeat at a time. The audience leaned forward, afraid to break the spell. Keanu didn't return to his seat immediately. He stood at the side of the stage, eyes on the little girl, his hands clasped loosely in front of him. It wasn't about attention anymore. It was about giving her the space to find herself again. Lila began the opening progression of River Flows in You. The melody started fragile, almost whispering, then opened into something pure and haunting. She didn't play perfectly, she played honestly. Every mistake carried meaning. Every pause felt alive. The hall filled with the sound of emotion rather than performance. Rachel covered her face backstage, her tears spilling freely. She had feared this would be the moment her daughter broke, but instead, it became the moment she soared. Halfway through the song, the lights dimmed slightly. The producers hadn't planned it, but the soft glow made the stage look almost heavenly. A girl who could not see was now guiding everyone else through the dark. When Lila hit the final note, it lingered like a prayer. For a heartbeat, no one moved. No applause, no shouts, just silence heavy, stunned, sacred silence. Then one person began to clap. It was Keanu. Slow, steady, deliberate. The rest of the audience followed, the sound growing until it thundered through the hall. The judges rose to their feet. The crowd chanted her name. Lila turned toward the sound of the applause and smiled, tears glimmering in her blind eyes. She didn't know who had helped her, not yet. All she knew was that someone had believed in her when everything went wrong. In that moment, every camera focused on Keanu's calm expression as he looked at her not with pride, but with quiet respect. And just like that, one act of courage had silenced 1,000 critics. The night after her audition, Lila couldn't sleep. Her small bedroom in Pasadena felt quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. The soft smell of detergent filled the air. Her mother had washed their only curtain by hand and hung it to dry near the window. Lila lay on her bed, running her fingers over the keys of a small practice keyboard that was missing its leftmost octave. That keyboard had been rescued from a thrift store bin 3 years earlier. Some of its keys stuck, and others clicked with a hollow sound. But to Lila, it was magic. She could lose hours playing, creating melodies that only existed inside her. To her, music wasn't about reading notes or watching hands move, it was about emotion. She learned to play by feeling vibration, by counting rhythms, by memorizing the sound of each key. Rachel often came home long after sunset, her uniform still smelling faintly of cleaning chemicals from the hotel she worked at. But no matter how late it was, Lila always waited up. She would play something she'd learned that day and ask, "Did that sound like rain, Mom? Or does this one sound like the ocean?" Rachel never pretended to understand the music perfectly, but she listened as if it were the most beautiful thing in the world. One night, while washing dishes in their narrow kitchen, Rachel paused to watch her daughter through the open door. Lila sat cross-legged on the floor, head tilted toward the sound of her own music, the lamplight tracing her small profile. Rachel felt her chest ache with both pride and fear. She wanted to believe that love and talent were enough, but the world wasn't kind to children who were different. When the winter storms rolled in, Lila found inspiration in the rain. She would sit by the window, her fingers tracing invisible patterns in the air. "The raindrops are playing their own piano," she said once. "They just don't have keys." Rachel laughed softly, touched by the innocence in her words. She took her daughter's hand and placed it on her heart. "Then you play for them," she said. That night, Lila wrote her first original piece. Something gentle, repetitive, like falling water. Rachel recorded it on her old phone and labeled it Rainlight. It became their shared treasure. But behind every melody was a quiet longing to show the world that blindness wasn't weakness, that her daughter's way of seeing was no less real. Rachel just didn't know how. One Saturday morning, as sunlight filtered through the threadbare curtain, Rachel returned from her early housekeeping shift, carrying a grocery bag filled with bruised apples and day-old bread. She was exhausted, but when she heard the piano from down the hall, her fatigue melted away. Lila was at the keyboard, her bare feet swinging as she played a tune she'd made up from the sound of buses braking outside their building. Rachel leaned against the doorway, smiling. "You're composing traffic songs." "Now?" she teased. Lila giggled, keeping her hands on the keys. "Not traffic songs, Mom. It's the sound of people coming and going." It's kind of sad, but kind of happy too. Rachel's chest tightened with pride. Her daughter had turned the noise of their chaotic street into something beautiful. "You've got the heart of an artist," she said softly. Lila stopped playing for a moment. "Do artists ever get to show the world their music?" Rachel hesitated. "Sometimes. But it takes a little luck." That evening, as they ate together at their tiny table, Rachel unfolded a flyer she'd found at the grocery store bulletin board. It was bright yellow with bold letters, "America's Got Talent, Open Auditions, Los Angeles." Lila's hands reached out to feel the paper. Her fingertips traced the letters as if they were music notes. "What's this, Mom?" Rachel smiled nervously. "It's a TV show. People perform, and sometimes they become famous. It's a big deal." For a moment, the room was silent, except for the hum of the ceiling fan. Then, Lila whispered, "Could I try?" Rachel froze. The thought of her little girl on a stage filled with strangers terrified her. The crowds, the cameras, the judgment, it all felt too harsh. "Sweetheart," she said gently, Those shows are very competitive, and the lights, the sound, it might be too much. But Lila shook her head. I don't want to win, she said quietly. I just want them to hear what I see inside. The words pierced Rachel's heart. She reached across the table, took her daughter's hand, and felt its small, steady warmth. From that night on, everything changed. Lila began practicing every day after school. Rachel found herself staying up late, printing music, fixing broken keys with tape, and writing emails to the audition office. They didn't have much, but they had purpose. The weeks leading up to the audition felt like a dream stitched together with exhaustion and hope. Lila practiced every day, her fingers gliding across the keyboard, sometimes missing notes, sometimes landing on the right ones with surprising precision. Rachel listened from the couch, often too tired to keep her eyes open but unwilling to miss a single note. They didn't own a proper piano, so the old keyboard sat on a wooden crate by the window. When the city buses rattled past, the vibration shook the crate, adding a faint tremor to every note. Yet Lila didn't mind. She said it made the music feel alive. One evening, the lights flickered and the power went out. Rachel sighed, worried that the practice would have to stop, but Lila smiled. It's okay, Mom. I can still play in the dark. She pressed her hands to the keys, and though no sound came from the unpowered keyboard, she continued to move her fingers, hearing the melody in her head. The sight made Rachel's throat tighten. They lived simply. Breakfast was often toast and coffee. Dinner might be soup from the corner market. But the house was never quiet. When Rachel wasn't working at the hotel, she cleaned offices at night. Still, she refused to let her daughter feel forgotten. On Sundays, they rode the bus together to a nearby park where street performers gathered. Lila would listen for hours, memorizing how each musician's tone changed with emotion. Once, she asked a saxophone player if she could touch his instrument. The man hesitated, but then smiled and handed it to her. She traced the cold brass with her fingertips, laughing softly. It feels like the color gold, she said. Rachel never forgot that line. When the audition email finally arrived, it felt like fate had knocked on their small apartment door. Rachel printed the confirmation and pinned it to the wall. The words, "America's Got Talent," seemed to glow in the dim light. Lila reached out and touched the paper, her smile bright enough to chase away years of fatigue. But behind the joy was fear. Rachel worried about what people might say. She'd seen how strangers looked at Lila when they walked together, some with pity, others with impatience. She couldn't bear the thought of her daughter facing that on national television. The night before the audition trip, Rachel sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the small suitcase she'd packed. The weight of responsibility pressed heavy on her shoulders. What if they were making a mistake? What if Lila froze on stage and the world laughed? Lila entered the room quietly, guided by the soft hum of her mother's breathing. She sat beside her and leaned her head on her arm. "Mom," she said softly, "I know you're scared, but remember what you always tell me. We don't need to see the road, just trust the steps." Rachel blinked away tears. Her daughter had turned her own words back on her. She wrapped an arm around her and held her close. "You're right, sweetheart. We'll take it one step at a time." The next morning, the two of them boarded a city bus with a single suitcase and the old keyboard wrapped in a blanket. The driver lowered the ramp, and as they climbed aboard, a few passengers looked up and smiled. Lila waved shyly in their direction, though she couldn't see their faces. As the bus pulled away, Rachel looked at her daughter, listening to the rumble of the engine, tapping her fingers to its rhythm, and she felt a strange sense of peace. Whatever happened next, this journey had already changed them. The old laundromat on Colorado Boulevard was the last place anyone would expect a viral video to be born. Machines whirred, dryers hummed, and the smell of detergent hung thick in the air. Between the rows of spinning washers sat Lila Turner, her small keyboard balanced on a folding table. Her mother, Rachel, sat nearby, folding towels from her shift at the hotel. It wasn't a planned performance. They were there because their apartment had lost power again. Rachel had plugged the keyboard into an outlet by the vending machine just to keep her daughter busy. Lila didn't complain. She loved the sound of the machine, she said. It reminded her of waves crashing. So while strangers came and went, she played softly, letting the rhythm of the room guide her. An older man waiting for his laundry filmed a short clip on his phone, touched by what he saw. A blind child playing piano in a laundromat, smiling at every sound around her. The melody wasn't perfect, but it was real. The man uploaded the video that night with the caption, "She doesn't need to see the world to make it beautiful." By the end of the week, it had crossed 2 million. Messages poured in, comments filled with words like angelic, pure, and heart of gold. Rachel didn't know what to do. She didn't even have social media. A friend at the hotel showed her the clip on her phone. When the email came from a producer at America's Got Talent, Rachel thought it was a scam. She almost deleted it. But the name of the producer checked out, and soon there was a follow-up call confirming everything. They wanted Lila to perform live during the next season's taping in Los Angeles. Rachel's heart pounded with both pride and fear. She knew her daughter was ready musically, but the logistics terrified her, navigating the stage lights, the microphone placement, the sheer noise of the crowd. She's never been in front of so many people, Rachel said over the phone, her voice shaking. The producer was patient. "We'll have assistants guide her. We'll make it safe. But we'd love for her to play the same song from the laundromat." It moved millions of people. Rachel turned toward her daughter, who was sitting cross-legged on the floor, tapping the keys in patterns only she understood. "Lila," she said softly, "they want you to play on TV." Lila tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "Then I'll play for everyone who can't see the stars," she whispered. Rachel pressed her hand to her mouth to keep from crying. That night, as the city outside dimmed into silence, she realized their quiet life was about to change forever. 2 days after the producer's call, the doorbell rang. Rachel opened it to find a delivery driver holding a large envelope marked with the America's Got Talent logo. Her hands shook as she signed for it. Inside was an official invitation printed on cashon, gold-trimmed paper, along with travel instructions and performance guidelines. When Lila heard the news, she gasped and clapped her hands together. "We're really going?" she asked. Rachel nodded, half laughing, half crying. "We're really going." The following week was a whirlwind of planning. Between shifts at the hotel and the cleaning service, Rachel scrambled to coordinate everything: transportation, hotel reservations, accessibility details for the blind. Every phone call began with the same question: "Will there be someone to guide my daughter on stage?" The staff promised that everything would be arranged, but the worry in Rachel's heart refused to settle. Meanwhile, the online buzz grew louder. A local reporter wanted to feature them, and neighbors stopped Rachel in the hall to say how proud they were. Even the woman who ran the corner grocery gave Lila a small bouquet of artificial daisies and said, "For your lucky break, sweetheart." But what none of them knew was that Lila wasn't the only one being invited to that taping. Across the city, Keanu Reeves sat in his quiet home studio surrounded by guitars, old vinyl records, and the hum of city traffic. He wasn't working on a film. He was preparing for a charity event with the Children of Light Foundation, a nonprofit he had supported for years. The organization helped children with disabilities through music and sensory learning programs. That morning, his phone buzzed with a call from the foundation's director. "Keanu, we're partnering with America's Got Talent this month," she said. "They're doing a special feature about how music connects people beyond sight. We'd love you to attend as a guest mentor. No speeches, no cameras, just presence." He smiled softly. "Presence is something I can do." He didn't know about Lila yet. He didn't know her name, her story, or the video that had swept the internet. But somewhere between the quiet rhythm of his heartbeat and the stillness of the morning, He felt the familiar pull, the kind that told him his path was about to cross with someone who needed him. He accepted the invitation. 2 different letters were now traveling through the same city. One addressed to an actress's old apartment-turned-hotel maid and her blind daughter, the other to one of the world's most recognizable faces. Neither knew that destiny had already penciled their names onto the same line. The hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock filled the quiet apartment as she sat at the table with a mug of cold tea, reading through the itinerary again and again. She checked every box on the list: tickets printed, hotel confirmed, medication packed, white cane ready. Still, something inside her wouldn't rest. The idea of her blind daughter stepping into a massive televised studio terrified her. What if the stage lights disoriented her? What if she tripped? What if the world laughed? She turned toward the couch where Lila slept, the soft glow of the streetlight illuminating her face. Even in sleep, her fingers twitched lightly, as if playing an invisible melody. Rachel smiled through her worry. Her daughter had a gift, one the world deserved to hear. When morning came, they boarded a train, bound for downtown Los Angeles. The city stretched outside the window like a moving painting, graffiti-covered walls, food trucks, and the scent of fresh bread from a bakery near Union Station. Lila sat by the window, her head tilted slightly, listening to everything. "Mom," she said, "it sounds like everyone's heart is beating at once." Rachel squeezed her hand. "That's the sound of dreams, sweetheart." At that same moment, miles away, Keanu Reeves was sitting in a small meeting room at the Children of Light Foundation headquarters. The director, a middle-aged woman named Dr. Simone Park, handed him a tablet showing a clip from the internet. "Before you come to the show, there's someone you should see," she said. Keanu watched the video of the blind girl playing piano in the laundromat. Her fingers stumbled at times, but the sound that filled the room was tender and honest. Around her, washing machines turned. People folded clothes. A baby cried, but she seemed untouched by the noise. When she smiled at the end of the piece, something inside him shifted. "Her name's Lila Turner," Dr. Park said. "She'll be performing at the same taping we invited you to. I thought you'd appreciate what she stands for. She reminds me of you. Actually, quiet strength." Keanu didn't look away from the screen. "She's not performing," he murmured. "She's speaking. Through sound." He closed the tablet and nodded slowly. "I'll be there." When Rachel and Lila arrived at the studio 2 days later, the scale of it overwhelmed them. Towering glass walls, lines of people waiting to audition, and camera crews moving like a small army. The bright signs and echoing announcements disoriented Rachel, and she could only imagine what it felt like for her daughter. An assistant named Mariah met them at the entrance and knelt beside Lila. "We've been waiting for you," she said warmly. "Would you like to touch the edge of the stage before you play? It helps you get familiar with the space." Lila nodded, smiling nervously. "It's big, isn't it?" "Very big," Mariah replied, "but every big stage starts with one note." While they rehearsed backstage, the production crew prepared the guest seating area. Keanu arrived quietly, wearing a simple black suit, his hair tied back. He slipped into a front row seat unnoticed by most of the audience. The lights dimmed, cameras rolled. Backstage, Rachel adjusted her daughter's hair and whispered, "You ready, my love?" Lila took a deep breath. "I was born ready to listen." And as she stepped toward the stage, 2 separate lives, one built from quiet struggle, the other from quiet compassion, were about to meet in the most unexpected moment of grace. The studio corridors pulsed with energy. Bright lights reflected off polished floors, crew members shouted directions over headsets, and the hum of anticipation filled the air. It was the night of the live auditions, and backstage felt like a living storm. Dozens of contestants paced nervously, clutching props, guitars, or costumes, each one trying to remember why they'd come here. In the middle of the chaos, Lila Turner stood quietly beside her mother. She gripped her cane in one hand, her fingers trembling just enough for Rachel to notice. Every sound, the creak of camera dollies, the shuffle of feet, the bursts of laughter seemed louder than usual. Rachel kept one hand on her daughter's shoulder, steadying her. "You're going to be great," she whispered. "Just remember the music." But Lila's mind wasn't calm. The scent of hairspray and coffee mixed in the air, confusing her senses. Every direction sounded like another world. Someone bumped into her shoulder and muttered an apology. She nodded, trying to focus, tracing her thumb along the handle of her cane in small, comforting circles. To her left, a teenage singer rehearsed vocal runs. To her right, a magician tested his card trick under a portable light. The air vibrated with tension and ambition. But then, a voice cut through it all, sharp and careless. "She's the blind kid, right?" a contestant said behind her. "They'll only clap because of that. It's pity applause." The words struck like a blade. Lila's hands froze mid-air. Her breathing quickened. She didn't turn around, but her posture sank. She wanted to pretend she hadn't heard, but she had. Every syllable pressed into her chest like a weight. Rachel spun toward the sound, her eyes fierce. "Excuse me?" she snapped, but the group of teens only shrugged, pretending. Innocence. One whispered something under his breath, and they laughed. Lila reached for her mother's arm. "It's okay, Mom," she said softly, though her voice trembled. "It's fine." Rachel swallowed hard, forcing calm. She knelt to meet her daughter's face. "No one gets to tell your story but you. Do you understand?" Lila nodded faintly, but her confidence had cracked. She turned her face toward the sound of the stage door opening, where she could hear the muffled roar of the live audience. It sounded enormous. Thousands of people waiting to see what she couldn't see. Somewhere across the hallway, Keanu Reeves had been quietly watching. He'd arrived early, escorted through a back entrance, and now stood near the side curtain speaking with the show's producer. His attention drifted as the harsh words reached his ears. He turned and saw the small girl, cane by her side, her shoulders tense. He recognized the expression immediately hurt, mixed with determination. It was the face of someone standing on the edge between fear and courage. Keanu stayed where he was, leaning slightly against the wall, his eyes following the girl and her mother. He didn't interrupt or draw attention. He simply watched, the way someone watches a candle flicker in the wind. He'd seen fear like that before on movie sets, in hospitals, in the quiet faces of people who carried invisible burdens. What struck him wasn't her blindness, but her composure. Even in hurt, Lila stood tall, her small frame steadying as she clutched her mother's hand. Rachel crouched again to fix a loose ribbon in her daughter's hair, forcing a smile she didn't quite feel. "Ignore them, sweetheart," she whispered. "You're here because of your gift, not your eyes." "I know," Lila said softly. "But sometimes I wish they'd see my music instead of me." Her words lingered like a fragile melody. Keanu turned away, his jaw tightening. He wanted to walk over to tell her that someday the world would understand that people often mock what they secretly admire. But he didn't want to intrude. Instead, he let his silence carry his respect. Minutes passed. Backstage grew busier. The stage manager's voice echoed from the intercom. "Next performer, please be ready, Lila Turner. You're up in 5. Rachel's heart raced. She bent down beside her daughter. 5 minutes, baby, just breathe. You've practiced this 1,000 times. "I'm not nervous," Lila whispered, though her trembling hands betrayed her. "I just don't want to let the music down." That sentence struck Keanu deeply. He'd met musicians who feared failure, actors who feared judgment, but never someone who feared disappointing the art itself. He stepped closer, just enough for her to sense someone's presence. Lila turned her head slightly, as if listening. There was no need for words. Keanu met her invisible gaze and gave the smallest nod. It was simple, but it carried weight steady, grounding, unspoken faith. For reasons she couldn't explain, Lila felt calmer, her breathing slowed, The pounding in her chest softened. Somewhere deep down, she sensed that someone out there understood her, not out of pity, but out of shared truth. The intercom voice returned, firmer now. "Lila Turner, please move to the stage entrance." Rachel guided her forward. Each step brought a rush of sound applause, laughter, footsteps on wooden boards. The curtain loomed ahead, glowing from the lights beyond it. Lila stopped for a moment, turned toward her mother, and smiled. "I can hear the lights, Mom." Rachel blinked away tears. "Then follow them, sweetheart." Behind them, Keanu watched the two disappear through the curtain, the hum of the crowd swelling like a wave. He exhaled slowly, hands tucked into his pockets. He didn't know it yet, but that brief exchange, one nod, one moment of silent connection, had just changed the course of both their lives. As Lila reached the side of the stage, the heat of the lights brushed her face. She could sense the size of the room by the way sound moved an endless ocean of air, filled with whispers, footsteps, and the hum of electronics. The floor beneath her feet vibrated faintly with the rhythm of applause from the last performer finishing their act. Her cane tapped once, twice, finding the edge of the platform. Rachel stood close, whispering encouragements between deep breaths. "Remember the beginning," Rachel said quietly. "Just feel the first note." Lila nodded, but her stomach twisted. The cruel words from earlier still echoed faintly in her mind. "They'll only clap because you're blind." It wasn't the first time she'd heard something like that, but it hurt more now, in this place where she was supposed to prove herself. For a moment, she almost wished she could disappear back into the safety of their small apartment, where the only applause came from her mother's hands. From the audience beyond the curtain came the faint rumble of anticipation. The host's voice echoed through the speakers. Up next is a very special young performer who's already touched millions online. Please welcome Lila Turner. The stagehand signaled. Rachel's grip on her daughter's shoulders tightened, then slowly released. "Go show them who you are," she whispered. Lila stepped forward. Each footfall felt enormous. Her shoes brushed the smooth stage floor as she followed the sound of her name being announced. The noise around her blurred into a single hum crowd, judges, cameras, all blending together until only one sound mattered. The faint whisper of her mother's voice behind her, fading into silence. Keanu sat in the front row, his hands resting loosely in his lap. When the spotlight struck Lila, he caught the tiny tremor in her fingers, the slight tilt of her chin, as if she were listening for something no one else could hear. He could feel the crowd's uncertainty, their curiosity mingled with doubt. They didn't know her yet. Rachel stood just off stage, her heart pounding so hard she thought the audience might hear it. Every instinct in her screamed to run up there and hold her daughter, to protect her from judgment. But she didn't move. This was Lila's moment, and Lila needed to claim it on her own. At that instant, Lila hesitated near the bench. A camera flash startled her, and she nearly lost her balance. The crowd murmured. Rachel gasped. Then, through the noise, a sound reached her, a single steady clap. Keanu's. It wasn't loud or rushed. It was patient, grounding, like a metronome finding the beat. Lila froze for half a second, listening. The tone of that applause wasn't pity. It was rhythm. It was signal. Something inside her clicked into place. She sat down on the piano bench, her hands hovering above the keys. The smooth ivory surface felt cold under her fingertips, familiar yet new. The tension in her chest slowly unwound. Rachel covered her mouth, tears streaming silently. Keanu leaned forward, eyes never leaving the stage. Lila whispered to herself, just loud enough for the microphone to catch it. "I can feel it now." And as her fingers settled on the keys, A hush fell over the studio. The lights dimmed slightly, and the chaos of the backstage world disappeared behind her. All that remained was her heartbeat, the vibration of the piano, and the quiet memory of one stranger's nod, reminding her she wasn't alone. The bright white spotlight poured down on the stage, swallowing everything around it. For Lila Turner, it felt like standing inside the sun. The noise of the audience faded until all she could hear was her own breathing and the faint hum of the piano waiting before her. She reached out carefully, her fingertips tracing the smooth edge of the instrument, finding the bench and sitting down slowly. The microphone above the piano captured the soft rasp of her breath. Her small voice broke through the silence. "My name is Lila Turner," she said, steady but quiet, "and I play what I feel." Her words lingered for a moment. Somewhere in the audience, a few people smiled. A child's voice whispered, "She's so brave." The camera zoomed in, capturing every detail of her trembling hands. The judges leaned forward. Some faces were kind, others uncertain, wondering if what they were about to hear would live up to the viral video that had touched the world. Rachel stood at the side of the stage, her heart pounding against her ribs. She wanted to breathe, but the air felt thick. Every dream, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, all of it rested on this one fragile performance. Lila adjusted her posture and pressed her palms gently onto her thighs to calm them. Then she reached for the keys. Her first touch was light, a single note ringing through the hall. The sound echoed sweet and pure. She began the opening of River Flows in You. The melody drifted like water, soft, delicate, uncertain. But after the third measure, something felt wrong. The spacing of the keys was different. Her hand searched for the next note, and her fingers hit two at once. The sound came out jagged, unbalanced. She tried to correct it, but her sense of positioning faltered. A murmur spread through the audience, faint but unmistakable. Someone whispered, "Did she forget?" Another voice followed, "Maybe she's nervous." Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. She recognized the look on her daughter's face, the sudden confusion that came when her internal map didn't match the real world. Lila pressed another chord, but again it sounded off, the rhythm stumbling. One of the judges glanced at the others, unsure. Their polite smiles tightened. The crowd's energy began to shift, from awe to discomfort. Even the camera operators exchanged uneasy looks. Keanu Reeves sat perfectly still in the front row, his elbows resting on his knees. He had seen this kind of silence before, the moment when an audience's faith begins to waver. His jaw clenched slightly. He could feel the tension crackling like static in the air, spreading from the judges' table to the rafters above. Lila tried again, slower this time. Her breathing hitched, her fingers shaking. Each misplaced note echoed louder than the last. The song she had played perfectly hundreds of times now sounded like something breaking apart. Rachel whispered under her breath, "Please, sweetheart, don't stop. Keep going." But Lila's hands hovered above the keys. Her face turned slightly downward. She couldn't see the crowd, but she could feel them. She could hear the whispers, the soft sighs, the heavy expectation pressing down on her like a storm. The song faltered once more, and the lights above seemed to grow hotter, harsher. Lila's fingers froze on the keyboard. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, her heartbeat loud in her ears. The silence in the auditorium thickened, stretching into something unbearable. She had practiced this song so many times she could feel every note in her bones, yet now the piano felt unfamiliar, like a stranger beneath her hands. The uneven leg must have tilted it slightly, shifting the entire alignment of the keys. A single inch's difference was all it took to unravel months of practice. The judges shifted in their seats. One leaned toward the microphone and whispered to another. Of the crowd, the audience was growing restless. Some people tilted their heads, trying to understand what was wrong. Others avoided looking at the stage, uncomfortable with the child's obvious struggle. Rachel stood frozen behind the curtain, her fingernails digging into her palm. Every fiber of her being wanted to run out there and fix the piano, to protect her daughter from the world's judgment. But she couldn't. The rules were clear: no interruptions, no assistance. She could only watch, helpless, as her little girl sat there in the spotlight, trying to find her way back to the song. Lila pressed another key, hesitant. The sound cracked slightly. The wrong octave. A few people gasped softly. Someone whispered, "Oh no." Her throat tightened. She felt lost in a sea of sound that no longer made sense. She couldn't see what was wrong, couldn't know that one of the back pedals had caught slightly against the stage floor, or that a crew member had bumped the piano leg. During setup, Keanu leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on her. He could sense the panic rippling through her like waves. It wasn't about the notes, it was about the invisible wall rising between her and the world. He'd seen it before, in his own life, that cruel space where effort meets misunderstanding. On stage, Lila lifted her chin slightly, as if listening for something only she could hear. She whispered, "It's not where it's supposed to be." The microphone caught her words, carrying them across the silent studio. Rachel covered her mouth again, tears pooling in her eyes. From the judge's table came a nervous smile from one of the women. "It's okay, sweetheart," she said gently. "Take your time." But Lila wasn't looking for comfort. She was trying to locate the heart of the piano again. The pulse, the vibration, the feeling. Her hands hovered, trembling, as if waiting for a signal. Then came another murmur from the audience. A soft, impatient sound that sliced through the quiet like a blade. She heard someone whisper, "Poor thing." Her lips trembled. She felt the weight of 1,000 unseen eyes pressing down on her. Keanu's jaw tightened further. He exhaled slowly, his expression unreadable. Rachel could see him now from where she stood backstage, his calm presence steady in a room of chaos. He didn't move, but the focus in his gaze was almost physical, as if his silence itself was holding the moment together. Lila's small shoulders trembled under the bright stage light. The microphone picked up her uneven breathing. A single tear escaped down her cheek, catching the glare like glass. The audience sat in uneasy silence, torn between sympathy and discomfort. Somewhere near the middle rows, a man coughed, breaking the stillness. She tried again, pressing the first chord softly. It was better this time. Still imperfect, but closer. She exhaled slowly, trying to remember her mother's voice, her words, the sound of rain on their window at home. But the voices in the crowd began to rise again, a few whispers turning into a restless hum. Rachel felt her knees weaken. She gripped the curtain for balance, whispering her daughter's name under her breath. Every second felt like an eternity. She could almost hear Lila's heart breaking through the microphone. Keanu remained motionless, his eyes locked on the child. To most of the audience, he looked like just another spectator. But beneath his calm, something was shifting. He wasn't watching a performance anymore, he was witnessing a moment of courage, being crushed under the weight of judgment. Lila's fingers lifted from the keys again. She turned her face slightly toward the direction of her mother's voice, though she couldn't see her. "Mom," she whispered faintly, almost inaudible. The sound was fragile, like a thread about to snap. Rachel bit down hard on her lip to keep from crying out. Every instinct screamed for her, to run onto the stage, to tell her daughter it was okay, to take her home. Then, in the midst of the tension, a slow and deliberate sound cut through the air. It wasn't applause. It was movement measured. Confident footsteps echoing against the floor of the studio. Lila's head tilted slightly. The sound grew closer. The audience turned toward it. The camera operators looked up from their monitors, startled. Keanu Reeves had stood up. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. He wasn't rushing or making a show of it. His steps were quiet, almost reverent. He moved toward the stage with purpose, his expression calm but resolute. The guards at the side hesitated, but the producers gestured to let him through. Lila's lips parted. "Who's there?" she whispered softly. Keanu didn't answer right away. He walked up the stairs, crossed the small gap between the curtain and the piano, and stopped beside her. The crowd's murmurs faded into silence. For the first time that night, the light didn't feel harsh. It felt warm, focused, human. Keanu looked at the piano, then at the small girl beside it. He spoke gently, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's okay," he said. "I don't need to see the music, I just need to feel it." The studio went completely still. The studio fell into a stunned, delicate silence. Every light seemed to grow softer. Every whisper faded away. The world, for a brief and trembling instant, stopped turning. Only the echo of Keanu's footsteps filled the air as he crossed the polished stage floor. At first, the audience didn't recognize him. He was just a tall man in a black suit, his face half hidden by the shadows of the spotlight. Some people thought he might be part of the show, a stagehand or a technician sent to help the young performer. But there was something deliberate in the way he moved, measured, grounded, calm. Lila turned her head toward the sound, her brow furrowing. She could hear the faint creak of shoes against the wood and the soft hush that rippled through the crowd. "Who's there?" she asked softly, her voice trembling just enough for the microphone to catch it. Keanu stopped beside her. The smell of the polished piano varnish mixed with the faint scent of stage dust and his own aftershave. He crouched down slowly, so he wouldn't startle her. "It's okay," he said in a voice low enough that only she and the nearest camera could hear. "I just want to help you find the music again." Lila's head tilted slightly toward the sound. "You're the man from the audience," she said, sensing the calm strength in his tone. "Yes," he answered simply. He reached down, his hands careful and precise, adjusting the bench so her feet touched the pedals more evenly. He noticed the back leg of the piano had shifted slightly, throwing off her sense of space. With a gentle push, he straightened the frame and set it right. The audience still sat frozen. One of the frame. Judges leaned toward the microphone, whispering, "Is that?" Before cutting himself off, the realization spread like a quiet wave. Gasps followed. A voice from the balcony whispered, "That's Keanu Reeves." Rachel stood just beyond the curtain, her hands pressed to her face. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. A world-famous actor, kneeling beside her daughter, fixing a crooked piano in front of millions. Keanu rested one hand on the piano's edge, so Lila could orient herself again. Then, softly, he leaned closer and whispered the words that would echo long after the show ended. "I don't need to see the music," he said. "I just need to feel it." The moment hung in the air like a suspended note. No one dared breathe. Even the director, watching from the control booth, forgot to signal the next camera angle. Lila took a deep breath. The panic in her chest began to fade. The piano no longer felt like an enemy. It felt familiar again, alive, beneath her fingertips. The air in the auditorium was electric, yet fragile, as if one wrong sound could shatter it. Lila sat frozen, her small hands resting lightly on the keys. She couldn't see the man kneeling beside her, but she could feel the calm radiating from him. It wasn't pity. It wasn't the anxious energy she'd felt from others. It was quiet confidence, the kind that said everything would be all right. Then he brushed the edge of the piano, checking the alignment once more. "Try now," he said softly. "See if it feels right." Lila pressed a single key. The sound rang perfectly clear. The vibration traveled up through the piano frame into her hands, grounding her again. Her lips parted in a small smile. "It feels like it's breathing again," she whispered. Keanu's eyes softened. "Then let it!" A collective hush swept across the crowd. The judges, still processing what they were witnessing, sat motionless. The cameras zoomed in slowly, capturing every detail: the faint tremor in Lila's hands, the steady poise in Keanu's expression, the intimacy of two strangers united by one fragile moment of courage. Rachel's tears finally fell. She wasn't crying out of fear anymore. It was something else, something closer to gratitude. This man didn't just fix a piano. He restored her daughter's dignity in front of the entire world. Keanu began to stand, but Lila reached out suddenly and touched the air in his direction. "Don't go yet," she said. He froze for a second, surprised. "All right," he answered softly, and instead of walking away, he lowered himself to sit on the floor beside her. He crossed his legs, hands resting loosely, as if he were simply there to listen. From the wings, Rachel could see him clearly now. There was no trace of movie star arrogance, no sense of performance, only patience. He was giving her daughter something far rarer than fame: presence. Lila turned her head toward him, her voice barely audible. "How do I make them hear what I feel?" Keanu looked up toward the endless rows of faces in the audience. "You already are," he said. "Close your eyes and let them listen to what sight can't show." The girl took a deep breath. She lifted her hands again, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in minutes. The panic that had nearly broken her was gone. The spotlight dimmed slightly, the sound engineer lowering background noise until only the faint hum of the air remained. The entire room leaned in, waiting for something none of them would forget. And as Lila's fingertips touched the keys once more, the first pure note rippled through the silence, clear, brave, alive. The first note drifted through the air like a whisper from heaven. It was soft, trembling, almost uncertain, but it was real. The piano had found its voice again, and so had she. Keanu sat quietly beside her, his eyes closed, his head tilted, as if he were feeling each vibration through the floor. Lila pressed another key, then another, her hands slowly remembering their home. The melody of River Flows in You began to emerge, fragile at first, then smoother, stronger. She swayed slightly with the rhythm, guided not by sight, but by the pulse of sound around her. The audience didn't move. No one dared to. The faint sound of the keys filled every corner of the room, rising and falling like breath. A few people in the front row wiped tears from their eyes. On the judges' panel, one woman clasped her hands over her heart, whispering, "This is beautiful." Rachel stood backstage, her hand pressed to her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks. She had imagined this moment so many times, but never like this, not with a Hollywood star kneeling beside her daughter, not with a world holding its breath as the child they once pitied played her soul for all to hear. Halfway through the song, confidence bloomed. Her head lifted, her fingers flowing effortlessly now. She played not as a contestant, but as someone free, someone unburdened by fear or judgment. Each note shimmered, painting the air with warmth and grace. Keanu glanced at her hands. There was something otherworldly about the way she played. It wasn't perfection, it was honesty, the kind of music that bypasses thought and speaks directly to the heart. He had spent his life surrounded by cameras and applause, yet in that moment, he realized how rare true authenticity was. When the melody reached its soft bridge, Lila paused ever so slightly. Her hand brushed against the piano's edge, steadying herself. Then, as if remembering his words, she whispered, "I can feel it." Keanu smiled, barely visible beneath the glow. "That's all that matters," he said softly. The final notes cascaded like raindrops. When the last chord faded into silence, no one spoke. The air itself seemed sacred, filled with something too pure to break with sound. Then, slowly, Keanu rose. He looked toward the audience, his expression calm and full of quiet awe. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to wait for his signal. And when he began to clap slowly, gently, the entire auditorium followed. The applause rolled like thunder, building from a single sound into a roar that shook the room. Lila smiled faintly, tears forming behind her closed eyes. She didn't know what the crowd saw, but she could feel it. She could feel that they were no longer clapping because she was blind. They were clapping because they finally saw her. The air inside the studio seemed to change. The bright lights softened, and the restless murmurs of the crowd faded into reverent quiet. Lila's fingers hovered above the keys, her small frame straight but relaxed. The panic that had once filled her chest had melted away. She could feel the warmth of Keanu's presence beside her, a silent anchor reminding her that she wasn't alone. For the first time since stepping onto that stage, she smiled. It was small, fleeting, but real. Then she took a deep breath and began to play. The first notes of River Flows in You rose from the piano like a fragile bird taking flight. The melody was delicate, almost hesitant, before expanding into something fluid and alive. Lila's hands moved gracefully now, gliding across the keys with the confidence of someone who could see the entire song inside her heart. Keanu sat quietly beside her on the floor, legs crossed, head tilted upward, his eyes closed as he listened. Each note seemed to vibrate, through him, resonating in his chest. Around them, the audience sat frozen, drawn into the stillness that beauty creates, the kind that demands silence. Rachel stood backstage, her trembling hands covering her mouth. She could barely breathe. The music that poured from her daughter wasn't just a performance, it was something sacred, something pure. The same child who once played in laundromats and bus stops now filled an entire auditorium with sound so honest that even strangers began to cry. The camera operator zoomed in on her small fingers dancing over the keys. Her wrists moved with a lightness that looked almost otherworldly. Each note connected seamlessly to the next, weaving a tapestry of sound that told its own story of fear, grace, and triumph. One of the judges, the one known for his blunt criticism, leaned forward. His expression softened. He whispered to the judge beside him, "She's not just playing. She's feeling every note." In the second row, a woman dabbed her eyes with a tissue. In the third, a man clasped his hands and whispered, "This is what music is supposed to be." And through it all, Keanu sat completely still, his eyes closed, his face calm. The lights glowed warmly over him, and the child beside him, casting a soft halo that made the entire scene look almost like a painting. When Lila reached the bridge, her tempo slowed, her tone deepened. Each note carried the weight of everything that had led to this moment. The whispers, the doubt, the fear, and the faith that had conquered them all. The melody swelled, gaining strength like a tide rising against the shore. Lila's fingers moved with purpose now, no longer hesitant, no longer afraid. Her body seemed to breathe with the piano, her chest rising and falling in rhythm with the music. Every key she touched released something deeper, something that had been waiting to be heard. The crowd leaned forward unconsciously. The tension that had once filled the room was gone, replaced by awe. The lights shimmered faintly against the polished black piano, and for a brief moment, it felt as if time itself had slowed to match her tempo. Keanu, still sitting cross-legged beside her, bowed his head slightly, feeling every vibration in the wood beneath his hand. The purity of her playing moved through him not just as sound, but as emotion. It wasn't the technique or precision that stunned him. It was her truth. She wasn't performing anymore. She was sharing something sacred. Behind the curtain, Rachel gripped the side of a lighting rig for support. Her knees trembled. She wanted to run to her daughter, to hold her, to tell her how proud she was. But she knew better. This was Lila's moment. All she could do was watch as her little girl transformed under the glow of the spotlight. The audience's faces glistened with tears. The cynical judge, who had crossed his arms earlier, now leaned forward, elbows on the table, his jaw tight with emotion. When the melody softened into its most fragile passage, he closed his eyes and exhaled, whispering something that no microphone caught. As Lila reached the final chorus, the studio seemed to hum with invisible energy. The song carried not just sound, but meaning, a story of a girl who had lost her way on the keys, only to find it again through faith, kindness, and courage. Every note echoed the simple truth of Keanu's words. You don't need to see the music. You just need to feel it. Keanu opened his eyes briefly to look at her. The corners of his lips lifted, not in pride, but in quiet reverence. He knew what this meant, not just for her, but for everyone watching. He understood that sometimes a single act of empathy could restore the soul of an entire room. The final bridge approached. Lila's tempo slowed. Her fingers softened on the keys, each note landing like falling petals. The audience leaned forward as one, breath held, eyes wide. In the wings, Rachel whispered through trembling lips, "She did it. My baby did it." And as Lila reached the final note, she held it long, steady, luminous. Then she lifted her hands and let the sound drift away into silence. For a few seconds after the last note faded, the world stood still. The silence was heavy, but not empty. It was sacred, filled with the echo of something that words could never describe. Lila kept her hands suspended above the piano, as if afraid to break the spell she had created. Her chest rose and fell softly. She couldn't see the faces staring back at her, but she could feel them, hundreds of hearts beating in rhythm with her own. Then, from somewhere deep in the crowd, a single person began to clap. The sound was slow, deliberate, steady. It was Keanu, the first to rise to his feet. His expression was unreadable, caught between awe and gratitude. The sound of his hands striking together broke the silence like the first drop of rain on still water. The audience followed. Row by row, people began to stand, the applause spreading like wildfire. The sound grew until it became a storm, hands clapping, feet stamping, people cheering through their tears. The walls of the studio trembled with the force of it. Rachel sobbed openly backstage, her hand over her heart. She couldn't see her daughter through the tears, but she could hear every bit of the love pouring from that room. She had imagined this moment countless times during their late nights in Pasadena, but never like this, never so raw, so beautiful. Lila sat there, stunned. The applause didn't sound like pity or sympathy. It was different. It was joy. She turned her face slightly toward where she thought her mother might be and whispered, "Are they clapping for me?" Keanu heard her question. He leaned in slightly and answered just loud enough for her to hear. "No," he said softly. "They're clapping for the music you gave them." Her lips parted in surprise, and a small, tearful smile crossed her face. She lowered her head humbly as the crowd's energy continued to swell. Even the judges couldn't contain themselves. The once skeptical man wiped his eyes before speaking into his microphone. "Lila Turner," he said, voice thick with emotion, "you didn't just play a song, you reminded us what art really is." The female judge nodded, tears running down her cheeks. "You made us all feel what you feel, and that's the rarest gift anyone can give." The host tried to speak, but his voice cracked halfway through. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we just witnessed something unforgettable." The audience roared again. Some stood on their chairs, waving their arms, cheering Lila's name. Others simply cried quietly, too moved to speak. Lila turned toward the sound of the applause, her hands still trembling slightly. She whispered to herself, "It worked." They heard it. Keanu smiled at her, his eyes glistening under the lights. "They did," he said softly. "You showed them what it means to see without eyes." Rachel finally stepped out from behind the curtain, unable to stay hidden any longer. She didn't care about the cameras or the rules. She rushed onto the stage, her shoes slipping slightly on the polished floor, and gathered her daughter into her arms. The crowd erupted once more, a sea of clapping and cheers that washed over them like sunlight. Lila wrapped her arms around her mother's neck, laughing through her tears. "Mom," she whispered, "I didn't mess up this time." Rachel held her tighter. "You never did, baby. You just needed the world to listen." Keanu stood beside them, quiet and humble, watching the two embrace under the golden stage light. He didn't move closer or try to take the moment. He simply stood back, hands clasped, a faint smile on his lips. The camera zoomed in on his face, on Rachel's tears, and on Lila's small, radiant smile. The world would replay that image for years, a blind girl and a kind stranger sharing the stage, united by the music that changed them both. When the lights finally dimmed and the applause began to fade, Keanu turned to leave. Before he stepped off the stage, Lila's small voice called after him. "Thank you," she said, her tone soft but certain. He paused and looked back, his eyes kind. "Don't thank me," he said gently. "Thank the music for finding you." Then he stepped into the shadows, leaving behind the sound of a young girl's laughter, echoing through the studio, a sound brighter than any note she had ever played. By the next morning, the world had changed for the Turner family. What had begun as a nervous audition was now everywhere on phones, laptops, and televisions across the country. The clip of Lila's performance spread faster than anyone could have imagined. The title beneath most of the videos read the same words: "Keanu Reeves helps blind girl find her music again." Rachel sat on the couch in disbelief, her phone buzzing constantly with messages from friends, coworkers, and even strangers who had tracked down her number through old posts. The living room glowed with the light of the TV screen, which was replaying the same video again and again. Lila sitting at the piano, Keanu kneeling beside her, whispering those now famous words: "I don't need to see the music. I just need to feel it." Lila, still in her pajamas, sat cross-legged on the floor, listening to the newscaster's voice. In one of the most touching moments in the show's history, the anchor said, "Keanu Reeves stepped in to help a blind contestant after her piano malfunctioned." Together, they created a performance that millions are calling the purest act of kindness ever caught on live television. Lila tilted her head, a small, shy smile forming on her lips. "Mom," she whispered, "I can hear the people clapping again." Rachel knelt beside her and hugged her tight. "That's because they finally heard your heart, sweetheart." The camera on the news cut to reactions from celebrities and musicians around the world. A famous pianist tweeted, "That child reminded me what real music sounds like." Another wrote, "Keanu's humility is proof that greatness doesn't need a spotlight." Within 24 hours, the performance had reached 10 million views. The number climbed by the hour. Hashtags filled every social platform. Number Lila Turner, number Feel the Music, number Keanu and Lila, and number Believe Again. Comment sections overflowed with messages of gratitude, from parents of disabled children to teachers who showed the clip in classrooms to inspire kindness. Reporters began camping outside their small Pasadena apartment. Network producers called non-stop, offering interviews, sponsorships, even documentary deals. Rachel's phone rang so often she stopped answering it. One morning, as Lila sat practicing quietly on her old thrift store keyboard, Rachel turned down the TV volume and knelt beside her. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "they want you on the Today Show tomorrow. They'll fly us to New York. Isn't that exciting?" Lila hesitated. Her hands rested on the keys, her fingertips tracing invisible shapes. "Do I have to talk?" she asked softly. Rachel smiled sadly. "They just want to hear about what it felt like to play that night." Lila turned her face toward the sound of her mother's voice. "It felt like breathing," she said. "If they really want to understand, I'd rather play." Rachel's throat tightened. She nodded and kissed her daughter's forehead. "Then we'll tell them that." The following days were a blur. Every network wanted a piece of the story. Morning shows, talk shows, podcasts, news outlets, each one called, asking for exclusive interviews or live appearances. Rachel tried to manage it all, but the attention quickly became overwhelming. Their mailbox filled with letters from strangers who said the performance had changed their lives. Some sent gifts, flowers, cards, even handmade Braille music sheets. Lila didn't fully understand the magnitude of what had happened. She could hear the excitement in people's voices, but it all felt distant, unreal. Her favorite part of the day was still when she sat at her little keyboard in their apartment and played the same melodies she'd been practicing before the show. The only difference now was that her mother often cried quietly while listening. Keanu, meanwhile, disappeared from the spotlight as quickly as he had entered it. Every network tried to reach him for a statement, but he declined them all. A journalist caught him leaving a charity event 2 days later and asked about the viral moment. He simply smiled and said, "It was her moment, not mine," before walking away. That sentence alone became another headline. The humility in his response deepened the story's impact. News anchors replayed it with admiration, and social media lit up with posts praising his grace. In a world obsessed with attention, one article read, "Keanu Reeves showed the power of stepping aside." But behind the glory, a quieter reality began to surface. The noise of fame started to feel heavy. Lila's phone kept vibrating with notifications she couldn't even read. People she'd never met wanted to talk to her, invite her, feature her. Everywhere she went, strangers wanted photos. Some touched her without asking. "You're the girl from TV," they'd say. Rachel did her best to protect her, turning down most offers, keeping their world small. But it was hard. Bills had always been tight, and suddenly, producers were offering money that could change their lives. It's for Lila's future, they'd promise. But each call, each contract, felt like a trap disguised as kindness. One night, after another day of endless attention, Rachel found Lila sitting by the window in her pajamas, her small fingers resting on the keyboard, but not pressing any keys. "Aren't you going to play, sweetheart?" she asked softly. Lila shook her head. "I can't hear the music anymore," she said. Rachel's stomach sank. "What do you mean?" "It's too loud now," Lila whispered. "Everyone keeps talking about me, about him, about what happened, but nobody's listening to the song." Rachel knelt beside her and gathered her into her arms. "Then maybe it's time to be quiet for a little while," she said gently. "Let the world catch its breath." In the weeks that followed, Rachel began turning down invitations entirely. They stopped checking view counts. The internet kept spinning, but inside their little apartment, things went still again. Late one evening, Rachel glanced at the small TV on mute. The news was showing yet another replay of the moment Keanu knelt beside her daughter. A caption read, "The act of kindness the world can't stop watching." Rachel smiled faintly. "They'll never know what it really meant," she whispered. From across the room, Lila's voice floated softly. "That's okay, Mom. I think he knew." 3 weeks after the viral performance, the glow began to fade. The headlines shifted from admiration to curiosity, and from curiosity to scrutiny. At first, it was subtle articles questioning how much of the moment had been spontaneous, whether the producers had planned it to boost ratings. Then came the opinion pieces, the talk shows, the online debates. Some called it the most genuine moment of modern television. Others accused it of being a staged publicity stunt. Rachel tried to ignore it. She told herself the noise would pass, that people always moved on to the next story. But Lila could feel the shift even in the hallways at school. Her classmates whispered about her as she passed. A few wanted to sit next to her at lunch just to say they knew the famous blind girl. Others avoided her completely, unsure how to act. One afternoon during recess, a boy walked up to her and asked, "Did Keanu Reeves really save you, or was that fake?" The question stung. Lila didn't know how to answer. She simply said, "He didn't save me. He just helped me listen again." The boy laughed and walked away. At home, Rachel found her daughter sitting by the window again. the sunlight casting soft shadows across her face. The old keyboard sat untouched beside her. "You didn't practice today?" Rachel asked gently. Lila shook her head. "The music sounds tired," she said softly. "Every time I play, I think about all the people watching me on their phones. It feels like they're listening for mistakes." Rachel's heart ached. She reached out and smoothed Lila's hair. "The world can be loud, sweetheart, but it can't change what's inside you." Meanwhile, on television, a gossip show host was sneering into the camera. America's sweetheart, the blind piano girl, turns out she might just be the perfect charity story. And of course, Keanu Reeves swoops in, the internet's favorite hero. Maybe it's time we stop falling for these feel-good setups. Rachel muted the screen before Lila could hear it, but it was too late. The video had already gone viral. Comments filled the internet, some defending them, others mocking. That night, after putting her daughter to bed, Rachel sat alone at the table with her laptop open, scrolling through messages. Among the noise, one email stood out. It was from an address she didn't recognize, signed simply, K. Reeves. The message was short. "Dear Rachel, I've been thinking about Lila and the light she carries in her music. The noise around her right now is temporary, but it can be hard to see that. I'd like to help her remember why she plays quietly, without cameras, without expectations. If you're open to it, I'd be honored to visit her." Rachel stared at the message for a long time, unsure whether to believe it was real. But something in its simplicity, in its humility, convinced her it was. She typed only one word in reply: "Yes." 2 days later, a quiet knock came at their apartment door. Rachel opened it slowly, half expecting a reporter or another delivery. Instead, standing in the dim hallway, dressed in a gray jacket and jeans, was Keanu Reeves. No cameras, no entourage, just him. He offered a small smile. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said. Rachel was momentarily speechless. You actually came?" He nodded. "I said I would." Inside, Lila was sitting on the couch with her headphones on, listening to an old recording of her performance. She didn't hear the door open until her mother touched her shoulder. "Sweetheart," Rachel said softly, "someone's here to see you." Lila pulled off the headphones. The familiar voice that followed made her freeze. "Hey, Lila," Keanu said gently. "Mind if I sit down?" She gasped softly. "You found me." He smiled faintly. "You were never lost." Rachel quietly stepped away to give them space. Keanu sat on the edge of the couch, his elbows resting on his knees. "I heard about what's been happening," he said. "The internet can be a strange place. It loves people one day and forgets them the next. But that doesn't change what happened that night. You made real music. You made people feel something." Lila nodded, but didn't speak. Her fingers fidgeted with the hem of her shirt. He continued, "You know, when I was younger, I used to think success would make me feel alive. But after a while, I realized that the quiet moments, the ones nobody saw, were the ones that really mattered. Maybe this is one of those moments for you." Lila turned her head slightly toward him. "I don't know if I can play again," she said. "When I try, I just hear noise. It's like the song's hiding from me." Keanu leaned forward a little. "Music doesn't hide. It waits. Sometimes it gets quiet, until we're ready to listen again." She smiled faintly at that. "How do I make it come back?" He glanced at the small keyboard sitting by the window, the same one she had played before everything changed. "Let's ask it," he said softly. He stood, walked over, and brushed his fingers across the worn plastic keys. Then, he looked back at her. "Come on, play one note, just one." Lila hesitated, but something in his tone gave her courage. She walked over slowly, her hand tracing the edge of the table until she found the keys. She pressed one. The note was sharp and imperfect, but it resonated through the room. Keanu nodded. There it is. She pressed another, then another. Slowly, the stiffness left her hands. The melody of Rainlight, her very first composition, began to take shape. Rachel watched from the kitchen, tears streaming down her face. There were no cameras, no applause, no flashing lights, just her daughter rediscovering the joy that had started everything. When the last note faded, Lila turned toward him and whispered, "I can hear it again." Keanu smiled. "Good," he said softly. "Then let it lead you, wherever it wants to go." The small rehearsal room sat on the corner of a quiet street in North Hollywood, its cracked window letting in soft morning light. The smell of coffee and dust filled the air. Inside, an old upright piano leaned slightly against the wall, its finish dulled by time. To most people, it was just another worn instrument. But to Lila, it sounded alive, humming faintly when she brushed her fingers across its surface. Keanu arrived early. He opened the door gently, careful not to disturb the stillness. Lila and Rachel were already there, waiting. Lila sat cross-legged on the wooden bench, her hands resting on her lap. She smiled faintly when she heard the door creak. "Good morning," Keanu said softly. "You ready to make some noise?" Lila grinned. "Only the good kind." Rachel chuckled quietly from the corner, her heart swelling at the sight of her daughter smiling again. She took a seat by the window, letting them have their space. Keanu walked over to the piano, tapping the edge of the frame gently. "You know," he said, "I learned music in a room not so different from this. My first bass was missing a string, and the amp buzzed like a beehive, but I liked that sound. It reminded me that imperfection is what makes things real." Lila ran her fingers over the keys, pressing one lightly. The note rang out, slightly flat, but rich with warmth. "This piano has stories," she said. He smiled. "All good instruments do. You just have to listen close enough." He showed her how to place her palm gently on the wood above the keys. "Do you feel that?" he asked. She nodded. "It's like a heartbeat." "Exactly," he said. "Every sound you make has a pulse. You don't just play it, you follow it. That's how you connect to people, even when you can't see them." For the next hour, the two explored sound in ways no camera could capture. Keanu taught her to feel rhythm by tapping her fingertips along the surface of problem, the piano, to listen for the subtle vibrations under each chord. He had her remove her shoes so she could feel the pedals hum through the floor. The lesson wasn't about performance. It was about presence. When Lila hit a wrong note, she flinched. "I messed up," she said quickly. Keanu shook his head. "No, you discovered something new. Mistakes are part of the music. They're how it breathes." For the first time in weeks, Lila laughed. It was light, spontaneous, and real. Rachel turned her head toward the sound, smiling through tears. She hadn't heard that laugh since the night of the show. As the morning stretched on, the walls of the little room filled with a rhythm that wasn't just music, it was healing. Two souls, one young and one weathered, were speaking in the only language that required no eyes at all: sound and feeling. After a short break, Keanu poured 2 cups of water from a small thermos and handed one to Lila. She took it carefully, her hands still, trembling from playing. "You know," he said, sitting back on the piano bench beside her, "most people think music is about notes, but really it's about space, the quiet parts in between." Lila tilted her head, thinking. "Like breathing?" He smiled. "Exactly. The pauses are what make the notes mean something. Without them, everything would just be noise." She ran her fingers across the keys again, touching them lightly, as if greeting old friends. "I used to play so people could see I wasn't broken," she said quietly. "Now I want to play so they can feel what's inside me." Keanu nodded slowly. That's the difference between trying to impress and trying to express. The world will always want the first one, but only the second one lasts. The words settled over her, like sunlight through the window. For a while, neither of them spoke. Keanu tapped a slow rhythm on the piano lid, while Lila listened. After a few beats, she joined in, matching the timing with gentle chords. The room filled with a simple, wordless song. No structure, no plan, just sound, moving through shared silence. When the last note faded, Lila laughed softly. "It's funny," she said. "Everyone keeps calling you a hero, but you didn't say anything that night. You just helped me find my place." Keanu's eyes softened. Sometimes words only get in the way. The best help we can give someone is to listen until they remember who they are. Rachel, who had been pretending to read a magazine, lowered it and smiled. "You should hear yourselves," she said. "You sound like two old souls talking in music." Keanu chuckled. "Maybe that's what we are." The rest of the lesson was filled with small discoveries. He showed Lila how to let her left hand find rhythm by resting her fingers over the strings inside the piano, feeling the vibration directly. She learned that the low keys thrummed deep in her chest, while the high ones shimmered near her fingertips. He told her stories about his own early days, how he learned to play bass by ear, how he used to close his eyes in tiny rehearsal spaces just to feel the sound bounce off the walls. "When I first started," he said, "I didn't care if the audience liked it. I just wanted to feel connected to something bigger than me. Music does that. It connects everything." Lila smiled and pressed a chord that vibrated softly through the wood. "Then I guess I'm connected too." He nodded. "You always were." When the lesson ended, sunlight filled the room completely, bathing everything in a warm, golden glow. Rachel helped Lila pack up her sheet music, though she didn't need it anymore, and thanked Keanu quietly. "You gave her something I couldn't," she said. He shook his head. "You gave her courage. I just reminded her it was still there." The music would never stop as long as they kept listening. The weeks that followed the private lesson felt peaceful again. Lila played every morning, not for cameras or interviews, but for herself. Rachel noticed the difference immediately, the way her daughter's music filled the small apartment again, the way laughter returned to their breakfast table. The noise of fame had quieted, replaced by something real. But peace, as Rachel had learned, never lasted long in a world that ran on opportunity. One afternoon, an email arrived with the subject line, "Offer from Silverline Records, New York City." Rachel almost deleted it, thinking it was another scam. But curiosity got the better of her. The message was long, written in polished language, and attached was a formal contract. The producer's name was Daniel Mercer, a man whose clients included some of the most recognizable names in the music industry. He praised Lila's viral performance, calling it a rare spark of emotion in an overproduced age. He wrote that he wanted to record her debut album, a project he claimed would introduce her to the world as the new voice of modern piano. Rachel read every word twice, her heart pounding faster with each line. The contract came with a signing bonus large enough to change their lives. It promised nationwide promotion, tour opportunities, and full creative support. It also came with fine print clauses buried deep in the legal jargon. Words like exclusivity, brand management, and studio oversight. When Keanu stopped by that weekend for another quiet session, Rachel handed him the printed pages. "It's everything I ever dreamed of for her," she said, her voice unsteady. "But something about it doesn't feel right." Keanu skimmed the first few pages silently. He'd seen contracts like this before, glittering invitations that came wrapped in invisible chains. He looked up at her. "They'll own everything," he said. "Her image, her performances, even her silence." Rachel frowned. "But it could give her security. She'd never have to struggle again." He nodded slowly. "Maybe not with money. But there's more than one kind of struggle. Losing your voice is worse than losing a paycheck. When Lila came into the room, the papers were still spread across the table. "What's that?" she asked, tilting her head toward the sound of their silence. Rachel hesitated. "It's an offer. They want you to make a record." Lila smiled at first. "A record? Like the real kind?" "Yes, sweetheart. But they'd want you to play their songs, follow their schedule, and work with their team." The girl's smile faded slightly. "Would I still get to play what I feel?" Rachel's heart sank. She couldn't answer. Keanu leaned forward gently. "That's the question you have to ask every time someone hands you a deal," he said. "If you lose your freedom, you lose your sound." Lila ran her fingers along the edge of the paper, listening to the faint rustle as if it could tell her something. "It sounds big," she said softly, "like the kind of thing people dream about." Rachel sat down beside her. "It is big," she said. "It could mean new instruments, a better home, money for college. You'd never have to worry again." Lila turned her face toward her mother. Her brow furrowed. "Would we still have time for music nights? The ones where we just play what comes to mind?" Rachel hesitated. "I don't know," she admitted. Keanu watched them quietly. He could see the weight of the moment pressing on both of them. Temptation wrapped in opportunity, disguised as safety. "You know," he said softly, "when I was younger, I thought saying yes to everything meant growing. But sometimes, the hardest thing is knowing when to say no." Lila tilted her head. "Did you ever say no to something big?" He smiled faintly. "More times than I can count. People offered me things that looked like gold but felt empty. I learned that freedom is worth more than fame. Because when someone else decides what you create, it stops being yours." She nodded slowly, absorbing his words. "But if I say no, people will think I'm ungrateful." Keanu leaned forward. "People will always think something. You can't control that. All you can control is whether your heart feels right when you sit down to play." Rachel sighed deeply, torn between practicality and principle. "Maybe I've been chasing the wrong dream," she said. "Maybe I wanted this for you more than you did." Lila reached out and found her mother's hand. "You wanted me to be happy. That's not wrong." There was a long silence. The old clock in the kitchen ticked softly. Then Lila spoke again, her voice steady this time. "I think I already know what I want to do." Rachel looked at her. "You do?" "I don't want to play for people who tell me what to feel," she said. "I want to play for people who can feel it with." Keanu's eyes warmed. "That's a brave choice." Rachel smiled through her tears. "It's the right one." The next morning, Rachel called the number listed on the contract. She spoke politely, but firmly, thanking Daniel Mercer for his offer and declining it. The man on the other end of the line was surprised. "You're turning down Silverline Records?" he asked incredulously. "Yes," Rachel said. "My daughter's music doesn't belong to anyone but her." When she hung up, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. That evening, the three of them met again in the small rehearsal room. The sun poured through the window, painting everything in shades of gold. Lila sat at the upright piano, barefoot, her toes brushing the worn pedals. Keanu handed her a folded piece of paper. "What's this?" she asked. "Something I wrote down for you," he said. She unfolded it and smiled. The note read, "Fame without freedom isn't music. It's noise." She pressed her hands to the piano keys and began to play a simple, original melody, something light, joyful, and unpolished. When she finished, she said softly, "I think I'll play in parks instead. People there don't care about contracts." Keanu grinned. "That's the spirit." Rachel watched her daughter, pride swelling in her chest. She knew this moment, this decision, would define who Lila became. The world had offered her fame, and she had chosen freedom. And in doing so, she had found her true song again. Months passed before the call came. Rachel was in the kitchen when her phone buzzed with a familiar name on the screen, the producers of America's Got Talent. At first, she thought it was a mistake. The voice on the other end was cheerful, polished, rehearsed. "We'd like to invite Lila back for this year's grand finale," the woman said. "It's not a competition slot. It's a guest performance, a chance to show how far she's come." Rachel looked toward the living room, where Lila was practicing softly on the piano, her hair tied in a loose braid. "That's very kind," she said carefully, "but I'm not sure if she's ready to step back into that kind of spotlight." The producer's tone warmed. "We want her to choose how she performs this time. No pressure, no expectations. We'll let her design the entire piece." Rachel hesitated, then said she'd ask her daughter. When she hung up, she approached the piano and waited until the last chord faded. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "they want you to come back to the show." Lila turned her face toward her mother, her expression unreadable. "To play again?" "Yes," Rachel said. "They want you to close the finale. You can do whatever you want, pick the song, set the tone, everything." For a long moment, Lila didn't speak. Then she smiled faintly. "Only if he plays with me." Rachel blinked. "You mean Keanu?" Lila nodded. "He helped me find my song. I want him there when I share it again." Later that evening, Rachel called him. When she told him about the invitation, Keanu laughed softly. "She wants me to perform? On national television?" "She said she won't do it without you," Rachel replied. There was a pause on the line. "I don't belong up there," he said quietly. "That's her world, not mine." Rachel smiled. "She seems to think it's both of yours." 2 days later, he arrived at their apartment again. Lila greeted him with a wide grin. "You can't say no," she said as soon as he walked in. "It's not about fame. It's about finishing the song we started." Keanu rubbed the back of his neck, unsure whether to laugh or protest. "You really know how to convince people. You know that?" "I learned from you," she said. "You said music connects everything. So let's connect again." He sighed, smiling despite himself. "All right," he said finally. "We'll do it. But you lead the way." Within days, the announcement hit the internet. Keanu Reeves to perform surprise duet with Lila Turner in AGT finale. The news spread instantly. Hashtags trended again, and fans flooded social media with excitement. Everyone wanted to see the pair who had once turned silence into magic return to the stage together. The rehearsals began quietly, far from the cameras and production crews. A small studio on the outskirts of Burbank became their meeting place. The room was simple wooden floors, soft yellow light, a grand piano, and an old acoustic guitar resting against the wall. For Lila, it felt like stepping back into a memory. Keanu arrived early on the first day, carrying his guitar in a faded black case. He placed it gently beside the piano and turned toward her. "So, maestro," he said, smiling, "what's the plan?" Lila laughed softly. "You start with something steady," she said. "Then I'll find my way around it." She sat at the piano, her fingers gliding over the keys as she felt for the right tone. Keanu tuned his guitar by ear, listening for the subtle harmony that would meet her halfway. When he strummed the first chord, she followed instinctively, building gentle ripples around his sound. It wasn't rehearsed. It was conversation through melody. Rachel watched from the corner of the room, her heart full. The two played for nearly an hour without stopping. When the final chord faded, Lila turned toward Keanu and grinned. "That's it," she said. "That's the one." He nodded slowly. "It's simple," he said, "but it feels true." The following sessions deepened their connection. They experimented with tempo, tone, and feeling. Sometimes Keanu would miss a note, and Lila would tease him gently. "You're supposed to be the professional," she'd say, laughing. He'd shrug and reply, "I'm just trying to keep up with the star." Through the laughter came deeper moments. One morning, as they paused between songs, Lila asked, "Do you ever get scared? Like, before you go on stage or do something big?" Keanu thought for a moment. "Every time," he said. "But I've learned that fear is just proof that something matters. You can't get rid of it. You just walk with it." Lila nodded thoughtfully. "That's what it feels like before I play. Like I'm standing at the edge of something important." He smiled. "Then jump anyway." When news of their rehearsals leaked online, excitement erupted again. Commentators called it the most anticipated duet in AGT history. But inside that small studio, none of that mattered. What mattered was the sound they built, together a mix of her gentle piano and his soulful guitar. On their final rehearsal day, they ran through the full piece one last time. The song began softly with his low, grounding strum, and then her piano joined in, light as wind. The melody rose and fell like a heartbeat near the P, and Keanu stopped playing and let her finish alone, a choice they made deliberately, symbolizing her independence. When she struck the last note, silence filled the room. Again. "That's it," he whispered. "You don't need me to lead anymore." Lila smiled. "Maybe not, but I still want you there." He looked at her, humbled. "Then I'll be there." Rachel turned off her phone, overwhelmed with quiet pride. This wasn't about redemption or celebrity anymore. It was about two people who had turned a broken performance into a story of grace, and now they were ready to share it one last time. The night of the finale arrived with a calm that felt almost unreal. Outside the studio, crowds lined up for blocks, their voices rising in excitement under the glowing marquee that read "America's Got Talent, the Grand Finale." Inside, everything felt softer than before. The lights weren't harsh this time, they glowed like candlelight, bathing the stage in a warm golden haze. Rachel stood backstage with Lila, helping her smooth the folds of her light blue dress. It shimmered slightly under the soft light. Simple, but elegant. "You ready, sweetheart?" she whispered. Lila nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of her piano cane. "I'm ready," she said quietly. I can feel the room breathing again. Keanu waited a few feet away, guitar in hand. He wore a dark charcoal suit with no tie, his hair slightly longer now, his demeanor calm as ever. When Lila turned her face toward him, he said softly, "Big night." She smiled. "Big music," he chuckled. "You always have the better lines." A stagehand approached, signaling that it was time. As they walked toward the stage, the hum of the crowd grew into a low electric murmur. When they stepped into the light together, the room erupted into applause. It wasn't the usual kind of cheering, it was something warmer, almost reverent. Everyone knew this performance wasn't about competition or fame. It was something deeper. Lila took her seat at the grand piano, the same model as before, but perfectly tuned this time. The audience quieted immediately. She reached out and touched the smooth keys, feeling the familiar pulse beneath her fingertips. Keanu sat nearby, adjusting his guitar strap, his eyes never leaving her. The first note rang out soft, steady, and familiar. "River flows in you." The song that had once brought her to tears now unfolded with grace. But this time, something was different. She wasn't following the sheet music. She wasn't even following memory. She was leading the song where she wanted it to go. Keanu joined in after a few measures, his guitar blending with her piano in perfect harmony. His strumming was slow and soulful, the deep resonance grounding her light, floating melody. Together, they created something that sounded both new and timeless. The audience leaned forward, captivated. Every camera in the studio zoomed in, but no one dared to interrupt. Even the judges sat in complete stillness, their eyes glistening. At one point, Lila paused briefly and added something new, a bridge she had written herself. The melody was unfamiliar, yet hauntingly beautiful, like a conversation between her younger self and the woman she was becoming. Keanu followed instinctively, matching her rhythm, letting his guitar echo her phrasing like an answer to a question. For a few perfect minutes, the world outside the stage disappeared. There was only the sound of piano and guitar, weaving together into something transcendent. As the song swelled, the melody grew, more alive, richer, fuller. Lila played with her whole body now, swaying gently with each chord. The piano keys, beneath her fingertips, vibrated like living veins of sound. Every note felt deliberate, every pause sacred. Keanu's guitar blended into her rhythm like a voice made for hers. It wasn't a duet, it was a dialogue between two hearts that had once met in silence. The cameras caught everything, the way his eyes stayed on her, not to lead but to follow, the way her small fingers moved with fearless grace, the way the light caught the sheen of tears in the front row. The audience didn't cheer or shout. They didn't dare. The sound was too pure to break. Keanu closed his eyes, letting his fingers glide effortlessly along the guitar strings. He wasn't thinking about technique or timing. He was simply present, surrendering to the song. The low hum of his chords wrapped around her melody, like arms around a heartbeat. Lila lifted her chin slightly, her face calm, her expression open. In that moment, she wasn't a child prodigy or a viral sensation. She was just a girl who had once been afraid, and now wasn't. The bridge she'd written carried the song into a new space, unfamiliar yet deeply human. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. The notes wavered slightly, trembling under the weight of emotion, but that imperfection made it more beautiful. When the final chorus began, Keanu stepped back musically, letting her take the lead. His playing softened until it was barely there, a whisper beneath her shining melody. Lila's hands danced across the keys, her movements fluid and certain. The final passage rose higher and higher, then slowed, holding the audience in breathless suspension. Then came the last note, clear, long, resonant. It lingered in the air like a heartbeat after a confession. The lights dimmed slightly, but no one moved. The silence was so deep that even the hum of the cameras faded. The entire audience sat frozen, as if afraid that any sound would dissolve the magic that hung in the air. Rachel, watching from backstage, had her hands over her mouth. Her tears came freely, not from sadness, but from wonder. She remembered the little girl who once played in their small apartment, listening to the rain. She remembered the fear, the struggle, the doubt. And now here she was, commanding the world with nothing but truth. Keanu slowly looked up, scanning the crowd before turning back to Lila. She sat motionless at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys, her breathing steady. And then, as if waking from a shared dream, the audience rose to their feet. The applause began as a single hesitant clap, then another, then a wave that swelled into thunder. The sound was deafening, but it wasn't noise this time. It was gratitude, joy, and awe, crashing together in one tidal roar. Lila stood and turned toward the crowd, guided gently by Keanu's hand. She smiled, shy but radiant, as the lights glowed, warmer, framing them both in gold. Keanu bowed slightly beside her, letting her stand a step ahead. He glanced at Rachel in the wings and mouthed two simple words. She soared. Rachel nodded through her tears. The stage lights shimmered as confetti began to fall, glittering like snow. The music had ended, but what lingered was something deeper. A quiet understanding that the world had just witnessed. Not fame, but freedom. Backstage, after the performance, the world outside still thundered with applause. The air buzzed with energy producers rushing, cameras flashing, Reporters calling names, but inside the narrow hallway behind the curtain, everything felt still. Lila and Keanu stood together under the faint hum of stage lights, both catching their breath. Lila turned toward him, her hands trembling slightly. "You stayed till the end," she said softly. Keanu smiled, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "You didn't need me to," he replied. She reached out and wrapped her arms around him in a hug that said everything words couldn't. Her small voice trembled as she whispered, "You helped me see music." For a moment, he said nothing. Then he held her a little tighter and murmured, "No, kiddo. You helped the world hear it." A few photographers caught the moment, their cameras clicking rapidly. But Keanu turned gently toward them. "Please," he said quietly, "let her finish her story first." His voice wasn't angry. It was steady, kind, and firm enough to make them lower their cameras. Rachel joined them moments later, her face still streaked with tears. She knelt beside her daughter and cupped her cheeks. "You were incredible," she said. "Do you know that?" Lila smiled. "I wasn't scared this time." Rachel looked at Keanu, her gratitude unspoken but shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she said softly. He shook his head. "She did all the work." The stage manager came over to tell them that the audience was still standing, refusing to leave. The producers wanted to bring Lila back out for one more bow, but she was exhausted. Keanu crouched beside her and said, "You don't have to go back unless you want to." She tilted her head slightly, listening to the distant roar of the crowd beyond the curtains. Then she smiled. "Let's go together," she said. They stepped out one last time. The moment they appeared, the crowd erupted again, standing ovation after standing ovation. Confetti rained down as Keanu gently guided her hand up so she could wave. He stayed a few steps behind her, letting the spotlight fall where it belonged. When the lights dimmed and the final curtain closed, Keanu walked with them to the car, helping Rachel carry Lila's small case of sheet music. The city outside the studio glittered with camera flashes and cheers, but he stayed quiet, content just to make sure they got home safely. As they reached the car, Lila turned toward him. "Will I ever see you again?" she asked. He smiled softly. "You'll hear me every time you play." The next morning, the world awoke to headlines that painted the night in gold. Every news station replayed the duet, calling it the most heartfelt performance in AGT history. Clips of Lila's smile and Keanu's quiet presence flooded every platform. Commentators spoke about the miracle of authenticity and how a simple act of kindness had reminded millions what art was meant to be. But for Rachel and Lila, the morning felt calm. The air smelled of toast and fresh coffee. Rachel stood by the window, her phone buzzing non-stop, as Lila sat barefoot at the piano, playing softly. "They're talking about you on every channel," Rachel said. Lila smiled faintly. "They're really talking about us." Rachel looked down at her daughter, her heart swelling with pride. "You made the world feel something last night." The news reports told a story that felt almost unreal. Donations began pouring in from viewers around the country, some small, some life-changing. A retired teacher in Ohio sent $50 for the girl who plays with her heart. A major tech company pledged $1 million to fund music programs for children with disabilities. Even schools in other countries reached out, asking for ways to teach Lila's method of playing by vibration and emotion. Keanu refused interviews, as always. When asked about the performance, his only statement was brief and humble. "It was her night. I just played along." But behind the scenes, he began quietly moving resources. Through his foundation, he funded a series of new community music programs under Lila's name, each one built to help children who couldn't see but could feel. Rachel learned about it a week later when she received an anonymous letter in the mail. Inside was a single page listing the first 3 locations: Los Angeles, Denver, and Nashville. At the bottom, In neat handwriting were 4 words: keep her music alive. She didn't need a signature to know who it was from. She sat on the couch, holding the letter, her chest tight with gratitude. For years, she had worked double shifts, sleeping 4 hours a night, stretching every dollar to afford piano lessons and doctor appointments. Now, for the first time, she felt like she could breathe. She decided that evening to quit one of her jobs, the late-night cleaning position that had kept her away from home. She would finally be there to help her daughter grow, not just survive. Lila noticed the change immediately. "You're home more," she said one afternoon as they practiced together. Rachel smiled. "I'm exactly where I need to be." As the weeks went by, Lila's story continued to ripple outward. School assemblies played her performance to inspire students. Music teachers designed lessons based on her tactile learning. Even small-town orchestras invited her to visit and play. But through it all, she stayed grounded. She still practiced in the same living room, on the same old piano that creaked slightly when she pressed the pedals. One evening, while she was practicing, Rachel's phone rang again. It was Keanu. "I heard the first program opened in Los Angeles," he said. Rachel laughed softly. "You heard? You started it." He chuckled. "She did. I just made sure there were pianos." They talked for a while about how quickly the world had embraced the story. Before hanging up, Keanu said, "Tell her I'm proud of her, and tell her to keep feeling the music, no matter how loud the world gets." Rachel promised she would. After the call, she turned to her daughter and repeated the words. Lila smiled and nodded. "I will," she said. Then she began to play again soft, warm notes that drifted through the open window into the quiet evening. Somewhere out there, Keanu might have heard them, the faint echo of a song that had begun on a broken piano and ended up touching the world. The year passed quickly, marked not by fame or spectacle, but by quiet progress. The foundation in Lila's name had blossomed into something far greater than anyone expected. Across the country, small classrooms began to fill with children who once thought music was out of reach. Teachers used her name with reverence, telling her story to students who learned to feel rhythm through the vibrations of the floor, the hum of strings, or the steady beat of their own hearts. In Pasadena, life had found its rhythm again. Rachel no longer worked nights. Their apartment, once filled with fatigue and silence, now buzzed with life and laughter. Every morning, Lila practiced in the sunlight streaming through their window, her touch on the keys lighter than ever. One afternoon, Rachel received a letter from a local community center. It was an invitation to Lila to perform at their annual concert for children with disabilities. The note was written in simple, heartfelt words. "You've inspired our kids to believe in themselves. We'd be honored if you'd play for them." When Rachel read it aloud, Lila's whole face lit up. "Yes," she said instantly. "I want to." The evening of the performance came quietly, without the flashing cameras or bright lights of her past stages. The community center was small, cozy, and filled with children in wheelchairs, walkers, and braces, sitting beside their parents. The walls were decorated with handmade paper stars and a banner that read, "Feel the music." Lila wore a simple white dress, her hair tied back in a ribbon. Rachel guided her to the piano at the front of the room, where a small microphone waited. The soft murmur of the crowd faded as she sat down, her fingers brushing the keys gently. What neither of them knew was that in the back row near the door, Keanu Reeves sat quietly, his head slightly bowed, wearing a plain black jacket. No cameras followed him this time. No one even noticed him at first. He had slipped in just before the concert began, taking a seat among the families, blending into the stillness of the room. When Lila began to play, the children leaned forward, captivated. The sound filled the hall, gentle, confident, full of warmth. Each note seemed to speak directly to them, to their struggles and hopes. A little boy in the front row reached out, pressing his hand to the wooden floor, smiling as he felt the vibration move through him. Keanu watched with quiet awe. He remembered the first time he saw her trembling on that giant stage, the panic in her small hands, the courage that had slowly replaced it. Now she sat poised, strong, and free. After the first song, Lila turned toward the audience and smiled. "I used to think music was something you had to see," she said softly. "But it's really something you feel. It's like light you can touch." The room was silent except for the faint sniffles of emotion scattered through the crowd. Lila continued to play for nearly an hour. Each piece told a different story. One about courage, one about loss, one about finding beauty in broken things. Between songs, she spoke softly, her voice steady and full of sincerity. The audience hung on every word. "When I first played on stage," she said between pieces, "I thought people were clapping because they felt sorry for me. But I learned something important. People don't remember you because you're perfect. They remember you because you make them feel something real." The parents in the crowd nodded, many of them wiping tears from their cheeks. A mother in the front row held her daughter's hand, whispering, "Listen to her, honey. That's what bravery sounds like." Keanu sat motionless, hands clasped loosely, his eyes fixed on the piano. He had been in dozens of concert halls and countless stages throughout his career, but none had ever felt like this. There was no grandeur here, no glittering cameras or roaring crowds, only authenticity, only truth. When Lila reached the final piece, she took a deep breath and smiled. This one's called "The Way Light Sounds." I wrote it for everyone who's ever felt like they were in the dark. Her fingers touched the keys, and a delicate melody unfurled through the room. It began softly, almost fragile, before growing into something bold and unrestrained. The music shimmered like sunlight through water, weaving through the room in ripples of sound that seemed to reach every heart. A few children closed their eyes. Some pressed their palms to the floor again, and others just listened with peaceful smiles. The music wasn't loud or showy. It was tender, pure, and alive. Keanu leaned back slightly, his eyes glistening. He wasn't just listening to notes anymore. He was listening to the sound of transformation. The girl he'd once helped in silence had become a light for others, her courage rippling outward in every direction. When the last note faded, Lila kept her hands resting on the keys, just as she had a year earlier. But this time, the silence that followed wasn't filled with tension. It was full of reverence. Then the room erupted in applause. Not loud or chaotic, but full of warmth and love. Rachel stood at the side of the room, her eyes brimming with pride. She had watched her daughter's life come full circle, from fear to strength, from noise to meaning. Lila rose and turned toward the crowd. Her expression was calm, her voice steady. "You don't need to see the world to make it beautiful," she said. "You just have to feel it." The audience fell silent again, letting those words linger in the air. From his seat in the back, Keanu smiled. His eyes shimmered under the dim light as he whispered to himself, "You did it, kid." No one noticed him leave. He slipped out quietly before the crowd dispersed, walking into the cool night air. As he stepped outside, the sound of her final note still echoed in his mind, a sound not of fame or success, but of something far more enduring. Grace. Morning sunlight streamed through the same apartment window where it had all begun. The soft warmth fell across the old upright piano, its wood slightly worn, its keys faintly yellowed with time. Lila, now a year older, sat before it with quiet grace. Her hands hovered above the keyboard for a moment, listening to the silence before she began to play. The sound that filled the room was calm and sure. It wasn't the trembling melody of a nervous girl anymore. It was the confident, flowing rhythm of someone who had grown into her gift. Each note shimmered with emotion, echoing the journey that had carried her from doubt to purpose. She still worked part-time, but her world had changed. Her daughter's music had brought hope, not just to her, but to so many others. She looked over at the framed newspaper clipping on the wall. The blind girl who made the world feel again. Outside, the world had moved on to other headlines, but for this small family, the legacy remained alive in every chord. Lila finished the first song and paused, turning her face toward the sunlight. "It feels different when I play now," she said softly. Rachel came closer, leaning against the doorway. "How so?" "It feels like I'm not just playing for myself anymore," Lila said. "It feels like I'm part of something bigger. Like every sound goes out there somewhere and finds someone who needs it." Rachel smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. "That's because it does." The sound of quiet footsteps came from the hallway. Lila turned her head slightly. "Mom, is someone here?" Rachel looked up and smiled, knowingly. Standing in the doorway, leaning against the frame with his familiar calm, was Keanu Reeves. He looked much the same as he had a year earlier, humble, warm, and effortlessly human. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said softly. "I was just passing by." Lila's face brightened instantly. "You always say that," she teased. "But somehow, you always show up right when I finish a song." He chuckled. "Maybe your music calls me back." Rachel gestured toward the living room. "Stay for a bit," she said. "She was just about to play the new piece she's been working on." Keanu smiled and stepped closer. "Then I'd love to listen." Lila's hands returned to the piano. The melody began softly, then grew with layers of gentle harmony, hopeful, steady, alive. Keanu stood silently nearby, the morning light casting soft gold across his face. He didn't speak, didn't move. He simply listened, the same way he had that very first night, when one frightened girl's trembling hands had changed everything. When the final note faded, he exhaled slowly. "That's beautiful," he said. Lila smiled. "I think I finally understand what you meant," she said, "about feeling the music instead of seeing it." He nodded. "And you taught the world what that really means." For a long moment, no one spoke. The morning sun stretched across the room, illuminating the dust motes that floated gently through the air. Lila sat still, her hands resting on the piano keys, her face peaceful. Keanu watched her with quiet pride. He could feel the same warmth in his chest that he'd felt the night he walked onto that stage, the sense that something good had been set right in the world. Rachel broke the silence first. "It's hard to believe it's only been a year," she said softly. "It feels like a lifetime ago." Keanu smiled faintly. "Some years last forever," he said. Lila turned toward his voice. "Do you ever think about that night?" "Every once in a while, but I don't think about the stage or the lights. I think about the sound of the first note you played after everything went wrong. That's the moment. Everything changed." She tilted her head slightly, smiling. "It changed for me too. You made me believe that even broken things can still make music." He looked down, a bit humbled. "I just reminded you of what you already knew." For a moment, the three of them stood there in a silence that felt whole. Then Rachel whispered, "You know, Lila, you've given more than music this year. You've given people hope. Everywhere we go, people tell me how your story helped them see life differently." Lila's expression softened. "That's what I want to help people see, even if they can't use their eyes." Keanu's gaze lingered on her, admiration and affection blending into something deeper. "You already have," he said. "You've shown everyone that vision doesn't start in the eyes, it starts in the heart." Lila smiled at his words. "That sounds like something you'd say in a movie." He laughed quietly. "Maybe, but this story's better than any movie." Rachel turned toward the window, her voice tender. "You know what I think? I think the world saw a blind girl find her song. But what they didn't see was how one quiet man helped her believe she could. Keanu shook his head gently. "I just listened," he said. "Sometimes, that's all anyone really needs." He glanced toward the door. "I should go. You've got music to make, and I've got another project to finish." Lila frowned playfully. "You always leave before lunch," he smiled, stepping into the doorway. "That's my secret. I never stay long enough to outshine the real star." She giggled softly, and he paused there for a moment, looking back one last time. The sunlight framed him perfectly, his silhouette outlined in gold, his expression peaceful. He gave her a small wave, then turned and walked out into the morning light. Lila sat quietly for a few seconds after the door closed. Then, she placed her fingers back on the piano and began to play again, her notes drifting into the day like whispers of gratitude. A soft voiceover closed the moment. True vision comes not from the eyes but from the heart. Then came the final invitation to the viewers. Have you ever met someone who helped you see life differently? Tell us in the comments. And after a pause, one last prompt. What kind of story would you like to see next with Keanu Reeves?